Well, welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I get to introduce Gabriela. She prides herself in the multiple roles that she plays in her family, for example, as a mother, daughter, granddaughter, and as a friend. Gabriela was born and raised in Quito, Ecuador, Abiyala, and has been living in Moquinsis, also known as Calgary, Treaty 7 land since 2011. She is a visitor to this land, and as such, she is grateful to the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis who have stewarded this land for thousands of years. After many years trying to assimilate into Canadian culture, she's on a journey of self-discovery, exploring her identities as an Ecuadorian, Latina, and Mestiza. She holds a master's in business administration from the University of Calgary and is a certified fundraising executive. She's had experience owning and running her own business and also has experience working with prominent companies like Procter and Gamble. Currently, Gabriela works at Canadian Mental Health Association as Senior Manager, Grant Strategy and Management, volunteers as board member with Family Advocacy Support Center, and is starting a data-driven nonprofit consulting group with like-minded colleagues. Welcome, Gabriela. So tell us a little bit more about how you discovered your passion and your niche.
So for me, it really was when I was doing my master's in business administration, and I got to learn about different industries here in Calgary. And I realized that for me, the nonprofit sector was something that I wasn't fully aware that you could actually make a living and you could actually be enjoying and kind of like progressing your career in that sector. So I started volunteering with a couple of organizations. And after working with Procter Gamble as an account manager for a couple of years, I finally decided that I was going to make the switch for the nonprofit sector. And that was what I was going to devote my career on. And 10 years since, I'm really happy still in the sector. I'm really passionate about the causes and the people and the clients that I get to work with and I get to serve. And it's been a very rewarding career so far.
Amazing. And speaking of your career, when it comes to the trajectory of your success, what are attributes of leaders or mentors who have played a key role in helping you get to where you are today?
For sure. I'm very grateful for all the mentors and leaders that I've had here in Calgary. I have been able to connect with a couple of people from different areas where I want to build my skills. So I think that's something that is really important, is that you are very self-aware and that you recognize what are your skills and what are some of the areas of improvement. And then once you found those areas of improvement, that you try to connect with people that you see out there that you can really admire and that you can maybe connect with them. And if you're lucky enough and they have the time and the energy, they'll be able to mentor you and answer any questions. So I think relying on mentors to develop skills that I need to build for my different roles has been a key element of my success. And I think also just thinking about each experience and what you're learning. So if it's a positive experience and your learning comes really easy, that's really great. But when you're going through challenging experiences or when you're going through a workplace that is in turmoil and there's a lot of change, or maybe they're not as far along as you think they should be in terms of their strategy or their way that they are being inclusive of different peoples, how do you take that as an opportunity to basically also learn and expand your skills? So that I feel like has been something that I've learned to do, is just take the challenges and also take them as learning opportunities. Okay, so what is this workplace? What is this interaction? What is this situation teaching me? And then when you think about it, that is when you get those skill sets. That's when you get that breakthrough in basically your achievements, is when you are able to overcome some of those barriers.
And when it comes to those learnings, so working in a size of an organization like Procter and Gamble is significantly different than the Canadian Mental Health Association, right? So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like working there and then transitioning into a smaller organization like the Canadian Mental Health Association?
For sure, yeah. Procter and Gamble is a multinational corporation, and they have teams across the world, and they really are a great place for for me, they were a really great place for me to start my career because they have really great training programs. And as a new immigrant to Canada, trying to get to learn the corporate culture in Canada, it was really important for me to have those opportunities and be exposed to those kind of like different training facilitators that were able to show me kind of like some of those different leadership styles and all of that. So I learned so much, and I'm really grateful for the people and the opportunities that I was able to experience during my time with Procter and Gamble. And working with the nonprofit sector, I've worked with both very small organizations. I worked with Green Calgary, which was 10 people, 10 people strong, was very different. And then I progressed to Bow Valley College, which I believe has around 1,000 employees. And then now a Canadian Mental Health Association, which has around 120 employees. So basically, that experience has been really different. It's been basically also allowing me to think about the difference in terms of like how I no longer have those really big training opportunities or those really big networks. How can I build those networks for myself? And how can I give myself those opportunities? And also taking each of the experiences and thinking, okay, what is this workplace specifically teaching me at this point in my career? So with Green Calgary, that workplace was teaching me how to be very resourceful. It was 10 people strong. So I would had to be sometimes, yes, fundraising and doing some business development stuff, but also out there delivering programs and helping with curriculum development and things like that. So it really showed me how to be resourceful and how to like be open and willing to learn about different positions. And then with both Bow Valley College and with Canadian Mental Health Association, I basically learned how to specialize my skills. So now that I've had bigger teams and I've had bigger support, how can I basically take what I've learned about myself and my skills and where I'm strongest and where I need some growth, and then take that and basically specialize my path, and then try to aim it towards something that is giving me lots of success, but also it's also being impactful out there for the organization.
And when you think back to your journey working in the different sizes of organizations that you've had, if you could turn around to someone who is looking to understand what size of an organization is a fit for me, what is a piece of advice that you would offer them to evaluate potentially what would be a great fit for them?
It depends greatly on where you are in kind of like your career development. So if you're super early in that career, it depends, right? So with bigger companies, it's gonna get harder to get in, to get that interview, to get hired. But once you're in, they're gonna have a lot of resources and a lot of people that is gonna be available there to mentor you. With small organizations, if you're early in your career, it's going to be easier to get in because they're basically struggling to get enough people in the team sometimes, and they're willing to give you an opportunity. They're willing to give you a chance. A great example of that is with Green Calgary. That's the organization that opened their doors and allowed me to try to make a career within the nonprofit sector. And they were open to explore somebody that had a sales background, but not necessarily a fund development background. They were willing to give me that chance, that first chance of like, how do I start my career in fund development? And I will always forever be grateful to that. So it's really interesting your question, because I've had that conversation with multiple coworkers and coworkers that now we are in a position where we're young managers, right? Like we're starting to manage teams of people, and we're also thinking for ourselves, how do we coach basically the people that we're working with, the people that we're now effectively leading? And we've had those conversations and saying, it really depends on each of the person's situation and each of the person's skills and objectives. So what I would recommend, if you are kind of like somebody that's kind of like trying to find the right size for you and are not maybe sure, are not finding like a clear answer out there, to connect with your network, find somebody that could be your mentor. It could be somebody that has already been there and tried that. that can give you a little bit of background. And once you get that one opinion, also get kind of like a second opinion and try to see what somebody else has to say about that same, and then take those different perspectives and then sit down and think about your own career, and then think what makes the most sense for me, like what is kind of like what I feel most comfortable doing right now with all the variables that I'm facing, and then being willing and open to learn, and being willing and open to give it a try. So that would be my recommendation for sure.
That's a really great call out, and just getting multiple perspectives and then remembering to sift it back into your circumstances, because each of our circumstances is significantly different for the most part, right? So I really appreciate your perspective on that piece. And when you mentioned that you were given the chance to switch from sales to the fund development and fundraising world, what would you say was one of the biggest challenges that you had to overcome when making that transition?
For me, it was basically trying to learn while also already performing on the job, right? So I joined an organization that was small but mighty, and we were looking for results right away. So we were trying to get funding in through the door so that the programs could continue to function. So you have a little bit about that pressure, and then managing that pressure, and then at the same time I was looking for some of learning opportunities out there that would allow me to get up to speed really quickly. So something that I always recommend to anybody that reaches out and wants to talk about fund development and starting your career in fund development is to get connected with the Association for Fundraising Professionals here in Calgary or wherever you are, to connect with the local chapter and look at some of the introductory training that they offer. In my case, they offer like basically a fund development 101 type of course that I was able to take over, I think it was maybe 3 days in person. And it was a full day training session. And you would get to chat with kind of like your peers, people that were really getting started in the fund development profession, and learn from. So once you're there, learn from the teachers, connect with your peers, ask questions, and start to build that network. Because when you have a question or when you're facing a difficulty, it's really helpful if you have somebody that's also going through the same things that you can reach out and say, hey, I'm facing this, how are you solving? So yeah, totally recommend connect with your local chapter, find some of those introductory courses that you can find. And I think that's how I overcame that initial moment where I was, okay, I have sales skills, but I don't really have that fund development experience and skills. How can I get up to speed really quickly? So I went directly to the source, to the people who have been doing this for years and years, and are basically the trusted advisors for the fundraising professions.
Well, thank you for sharing that resource. And the other question that comes to mind as you talk about this is, we all appreciate holding on to our finances, especially when it's difficult times or whatever it may be. So, like, what is this superpower, something that you have where you can walk up to someone or an organization and be like, hey, I think that you should sponsor us, or I think you should fund XYZ because like you're going to make a positive impact, right? Like what are ways, yeah, like what's your superpower in getting someone to say yes?
I wouldn't say it's a superpower, but thank you for putting it that way. That is very kind. I think that the ways that I found success, it is very much a process of looking at the funders' priorities and what they're looking to achieve with their community investment program, and then looking at the organization that you are representing and that you're fundraising for, and see what are some of those opportunities for partnership, for collaboration. So I think I was looking at in the past year, so what has been really successful, and what are some of the best examples that I've had for successful grant applications and things like that. And it's been really where I go through all of the priorities. I have meetings with their community investment persons or their grants coordinator, And I really try to get as much information as I can about what is it that they're looking for in terms of their community investment. And it is for sure a difficult economic situation that we are going through. It is some trying times, but we know that foundations, for instance, or corporate foundations, they always have this mandate of investing in the community. And I think they realize that in economic downtime, the need is greater. So they still have a budget, maybe limited, but they still have a budget to be able to invest. So it becomes more and more crucial as kind of like the fund development person that you're able to clearly speak to that connection between your organization and the community investment priorities, and that you're able to clearly articulate what the impact is going to be and why it is so important and so crucial and also so urgent that this community investment person sees how to invest in you and how you are going to basically with those funds translate them into social impact that is going to in the end benefit us all. So that is something that we've been seeing still, and there's still funding out there. It's just a matter of like knowing that you have to become very specific and very supportive of the priorities that community investment person is going to have.
I really appreciate that tip because it makes me think back to whether it's in sales, you are a leader asking for resources for your team, or I guess now in the fund development space is like you really need to get crystal clear on what the other person's priorities or pain points are and then directly speak to it, right? Because other than that, it's just they don't have the time of their day for you in that moment, right? And I guess when it comes to visible minorities and getting their foot in the door for those different circles and being able to speak to these decision makers, what would you say is one of the biggest difficulties that you've seen people have to overcome?
I think that we all are aware that we all have biases, and we also know that some people might not be, and it's often the case that people are not conscious of those biases. So when I think about the hiring process and people getting kind of like their foot in the door, it is often the case where you're seeing people that are white Canadians hiring white Canadians because they see themselves reflected in that applicant, and they see themselves being able to coach that applicant because they share so much in common that they're going to understand where they're coming from and they're going to know how to guide them. When maybe they see somebody like me, like an immigrant from Latin America, and maybe they've never worked with an immigrant from Latin America, and they don't really know if they're going to be able to coach me and if they're going to be able to relate to me. So I've learned to come from that place of understanding of those kind of like almost inherent biases that we all have, and that is a barrier that I feel like we are facing right now in the system. So I think a way that I've seen me and other professionals overcome that barrier has been connecting with those immigrants or visible minority people that have been successful at breaking that barrier, right? And learning, okay, so specifically for, let's say, for fund development, if somebody wanted to talk to me and say, okay, so how do I convey that I'm a good candidate? Then I would look at their profile and basically give very pointed tips and kind of like suggestions of the things that they can do. So which is, again, why it is so important to build a community around yourself and build basically a network. Something that I also wanted to mention is it's important that that community and network that you build, it's diverse. So you are going to for sure connect with those successful equity-seeking group members that you can relate to, but also make the effort to connect with basically white Canadians that you are maybe seeing. Like the team that I'm applying to join, it's mostly white Canadians. So how can I learn about their perspective? How can I learn about their way of working, about their work culture and their work ethic? The best way is for you to go and find a white Canadian mentor that can basically help you bridge that gap. I would recommend that you try to get an introduction from somebody that knows them and can do that introduction, or that you join some of the mentorship programs that are out there that are very, very valuable. I joined one through the University of Calgary, and that one paired me with somebody that was really, really great. And she was one of my most important, she has been one of my most important mentors to this day. So how can you find somebody that is going to be able to bridge that gap for you, explain to you what it's like working in Canada, what are those hiring managers looking for, and how can you respond to any concerns that they may have? How can you kind of like ease their mind about some of the things that maybe they're saying, oh, you have international education or you have international experience. I don't know how that translates to the Canadian market. So find those ways that you're able to make those translations and reassure their minds and saying, I am the best candidate for this job. And so I think that should be the approach for sure.
One thing that I really am sitting on right now is when you talked about building your community and not only finding people who look like you that have succeeded, but it's also those who don't look like you because they're already at that stage where you want to be, right? And unfortunately, you need someone to bridge the gap. I should say fortunately or unfortunately, right? And so that's a really great call out again on having those warm introductions because it's easier to be able to sit at the same table when you do have a trusted referral, right? And tying into the biases piece, part of your areas of expertise includes leveraging data driven fund development as a tool to advance equity and anti racism. So, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
For that one, I really have gotten the inspiration on a group. It's called the Community Centric Fundraising. And if you Google them, or basically their website is communitycentricfundraising.org. So I welcome everybody, regardless of your background, to just check them out because they are a really amazing group. And basically, they are out of the US, but they are really changing the way we're thinking about fundraising and the way we're thinking about fund development and how we are, where are we placing the power and where are we placing kind of like the focus on. And their premise is that the focus should be on the community. And their premise is that it should be centered in the impact and not necessarily in the stakeholders that have an interest in connecting with that community. They are all about protecting basically visible minorities, for like protecting the fact that sometimes when we are trying to work in this Western white focused world, sometimes our values and our principles, they get basically in conflict when we're not aligning with what kind of like the white culture is asking us to do. So one of the things that they mention is how can you take grant writing specifically. There's an article in there from one of their writers that's saying, how can you take grant writing and use it to help advance EBI in your organization? And the author has some really great examples about how you can take, for instance, the questions that grantors ask in the application form and use those to build your case internally in your organization, saying, I am seeing more and more grantors out there that are asking, how are you involving the community you're serving? How are you actively involving them in the decision making? And so I see that question more and more. Grantors are asking it more and more. So then I use that as, here is tangible proof that grantors are looking to invest in those organizations that are actively involving the community in the decision making, in the design of the programs. And internally, I see that our board, it's very white. And our board doesn't have lived experience representation at the board. So then you can start building a case for, there should be these changes. There should be more inclusion of folks with lived experience in actively designing the programs that they are then going to be offered. there should be more of an emphasis on like how do we ensure that the programs that we're putting out there are being supportive of different cultures and not trying to get people to assimilate to what we think it's the right way to go. So it is fascinating, and it is something that I have been doing at my employers, where I present basically the information. And that's why I call it data driven fund development, is because I'm presenting the trends. I'm presenting to them, look, here's where the funding monies are being directed to. Here's where I see the grantors. Here's all the examples of all the grantors that are doing this. Here are all the examples of all the other charities that are already adopting all of these measures. We are losing funding if we are not staying relevant and meaningful. We are losing funding if we are not responding to these calls for more EDI in our organization. So I think that's one of the things that I was really excited to bring forward at this podcast is how can, from wherever you are in your organization, how can you use what you're seeing out there? How can you use the data that is already out there to help move the case and move the organization towards more equity and more social justice practices?
That's actually fascinating how you leverage that data. And you're absolutely correct, where you really have to be tuned into what's going on in the world and your competitors or whatever it may be. And then on top of that is just internally having everyone involved, right? Because when you do have everyone possible to be involved, that lived experiences piece will take you further than you otherwise would have gone, right? And so, as we slowly wrap up our conversation, one of the questions that comes to mind is, from your perspective, what does it take to unleash the potential of an individual or an organization?
I'm going to speak specifically for like my experience and as an immigrant here in Calgary, as a mestizo immigrant from Ecuador. I think personally, what it took to unleash my potential was basically um, to stop trying to assimilate into the culture, like to stop trying to fit basically maybe a preconceived notion of like what your career should like and what your network should look like and what your stance once you're in an organization, how you should be behaving and how you should be speaking up or not speaking up. So letting go of those things is going to allow you to tap into that inner energy and like that inner passion that you have, and saying, well, I am pushing this initiative and I'm pushing these changes, and I'm coming from this place, and this is why this is so important to me, and this is why I'm so motivated to continue on this path. And then you realize that things like speaking up and trying to garner the support from different team members and making presentations to leadership and finding ways to be influential and advancing your career and advancing your leadership, it comes very, very naturally. It comes from that moment of like, I know where my energy is coming from and I know what motivates me, and I am going to be facing all these barriers, and I am going to be facing sometimes criticism and things like that. But this is why it is important, and this is why I'm going to continue to drive it. And I think for me, that has been a really big thing, that I am finally knowing that I have a voice, and that I'm finally knowing that my leadership is coming beyond my title, and it's coming more from like the things that I have been able to achieve, and the people that I have been able to connect with, and the projects and the initiatives that we've been able to move together. I am really hopeful, and I'm really excited for the my peers and the next generation of fundraisers and people working in the nonprofit and charitable sector, continuing to do that, to tap that inner passion, to tap that inner energy, and not trying to accommodate to kind of like the status quo, but actually looking to create a new way of like advancing this sector, a new way of thinking of about the social impact sector and how it should be progressing.
I think it's beautiful that you've created this space and have the awareness to be like, hey, like, you know what? I need to show up as my whole self in this way for me to truly reach my potential. Because then, as a leader and as a board member, you then create the space for others to do the same. So that's amazing. And my last question to you is, what is one thing that you're working on right now that you are most excited about and want to share with us?
So one of the things that I'm working on and I'm most excited is basically what you mentioned at the beginning in the introduction. I have been connecting with my peers and like-minded, specifically peers, to create our own consulting firm. And we are basically at the very early stages, but really what we've been finding is that many of the decisions that are taking and sometimes the assumptions and the objectives and the strategies that are created in the charitable sector, in the nonprofit sector, are a bit disconnected with the data that is out there. And what we really believe in is basically driving that data and presenting it in a way that is easy to digest and it's easy for the decision makers to understand it, process it, and then make a decision. Which is why we are basically calling it data-driven consulting for nonprofits. And we are looking to basically partner with nonprofits that are looking to leverage the data that they already have in order to make informed decisions, in order to take insightful action. And that is something that I'm looking forward to launching in the fall with my peers and really trying to find ways to help the nonprofit sector be more connected to the data that is out there, being able to show that the decisions that are made that they are making are based on clear evidence of like this is where this is coming from and these are the trends and this is where we can say okay this is we can say the sector is going or that specific cause is going and be able to present that to the decision makers so that they can basically take that information and translate it into action.
I'm so excited for you and your peers to launch that in fall, and especially that using that data piece to inform a lot of their planning. Because if you're already limited in resources and funds, you really want to make sure that you're mindful of how you approach your operations and the services that you provide, right? Thank you again for sharing your story and your insights. I really appreciate it, Gabriela. And to everyone for tuning in to another episode, thank you so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to stay in touch with you in my next episode. Till then, stay safe.